Hey, how's it going? Welcome to my channel. If you're new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. Especially if you're interested in the KTM 390 Adventure, or if you have one, you can see some of the interesting things that I get myself into on this bike. Now, I keep getting the same question over and over and over again. As the title suggests, it is what this bike is like on the road, specifically on the freeway, the highway, the interstate. I thought, because I'm getting so many of those questions, it's time to actually get to this video. I had filmed this before last fall, but because the wind was really bad. Oh, I hope the microphone's not picking up the wind. It's in my face. And I had spent a lot of time on it. It just wasn't worth releasing, so this is a redo, which is why it's taken me so long to film this, doing it again. I have 8,300 miles on this bike. I just finished a 2,700 mile ride to La Paz, Mexico and back. So I'm pretty confident that I know this bike. I know what it's capable of doing on the road, and I have a good feel and can describe the bike to you. So I've got it broken down into 6 different categories: the engine, the suspension, the ergonomics, the electronics, braking, and then finally the tires that come on the bike. So I'll talk about all of those sections of the bike so that you, if you're interested in this bike or if you have one yourself, you can see what my experience has been on it, what my thoughts are on the bike, and then that may help you make some decisions on what you do. So stick around and we'll talk about this bike, the KTM 390 Adventure. I'd previously put together a little video segment on what I thought about this engine, so I'll let that roll real quick. I'm going to talk about the engine here. It's 373 cc, 44 horsepower. I don't remember what the torque is. You can look that up. But I think it develops max torque around 6,800 RPM and max RPM around, I don't know, 8,800 RPM. The engine feels, I enjoy riding this bike. I like the way the engine feels. If you've ever seen like a 12-year-old kid who's finished off a 1-pound bag of Sour Patch Kids and all that hyper energy, and they just need to go and run and get all that energy out, that's a little bit of what this engine reminds me of. When you keep the RPMs up, it feels like it wants to go, and just wants to be let loose. So now you got my thoughts on what this engine is like to me. The best throttle response from this engine is above 5,000 RPM. If it's below that and you try to give it a lot of throttle, it bogs down a little bit. It's gonna take a while for it to catch up. But if you're above 5,000 to 6,000 RPM and higher, when you give it throttle, you're gonna feel it pull. I mean, pull for a single cylinder 373 cc engine. I find it to be fun. It's not gonna pull you off of the bike, but it's still exhilarating. It's still fun to ride in that way. This engine is the smoothest, running between 6,000 and 8,000 RPM. As long as you're in that range, the vibrations are at a minimal level. It makes it much more comfortable for riding highway speeds, freeway speeds. When you're doing 65, 70, 75 miles an hour, that seems to be the sweet spot for this engine. The bike has a quick shifter, and I use it about half of the time. You still have to blip the throttle in order for the quick shifter to work. So it's not much different than just doing clutchless shifts. The one thing I have found with this is if I'm not really firm on the gear shift, moving it up to where it stops, and I'm using the quick shifter, it has a tendency to slip back down into like a false neutral. I notice it between 3rd and 4th, 4th and 5th, and 5th and 6th. Part of that is I'm just not being very deliberate with my shifts. If I'm lazy with them, then I experience that. But I don't have that happen when I use the clutch. For whatever reason, between I'm doing the quick shifts and the clutching, the clutch is always a firm shift and it sits in its gear. This engine has a slipper clutch, so basically what that means is if you drop it down a gear, that the wheel speed is faster than the engine speed. It allows some wheel speed to overtake the engine a little bit with that slipping in the clutch so that you don't lock up the rear wheel. It's a safety feature. It works fine. I like the clutch on this bike. I don't have issues with stalling this bike like I have with other small bikes. I think it's a really well put together package there. The biggest question I get about this bike is how it feels on the freeway, how it feels on interstate highway speeds, and I can tell you that it is perfectly comfortable running at those speeds. At 70 miles per hour, the engine is around 6,200 RPMs, which is kind of in the throttle sweet spot. At 80 miles per hour, it's around 7,000 RPM, so it's well within its comfort range and where it feels the smoothest, and it'll cruise at those speeds all day long without any problem. Now, it's not gonna jump and be able to make passes like you would on bigger capacity bikes. You have to plan that a little bit more, but I don't find that to be a big issue. Now, if you're gonna be running at those speeds, this bike is lighter, so it's not gonna feel as planted. Wind buffeting from big semi trucks and just large vehicles, you're gonna notice it, you're gonna get blown around a little bit. If it's a windy day, you're gonna get blown around a little bit more than you would have if you were on a big bike. But as long as you know that going into it, it's fine. I plan all of my passes ahead of time. You have to with this bike. And if I'm on the interstate for any period of time and I need to get around a semi, I make sure it's completely clear along the entire length of the semi. I don't sit on the side of the semi at any point, so that I can just throttle up and then get past it and get back to whatever speed I'm comfortable running at on the interstate. It's stable at those speeds. I don't feel any vibrations. I haven't had any other issues come from it. I didn't buy this bike to sit on the interstate and run those speeds. I know sometimes we have to do that to get places. It'll do it. It'll do it just fine. All right, the last thing is this engine is a little bit more sensitive to the fuel quality as far as how much the range you're gonna get on a tank. At premium, with using premium fuels, you can get about 200 miles on the tank, 200, 220, depending on how much you're on the throttle and what speed you're running at. When I was in Baja, I was only able to get 87 octane at about half of the stations. And what I saw that did is it knocked down my miles per gallon for what I'm usually getting, 65 to 70, down to about 55 to 60 miles per gallon. So my range went from being about 200 to 220 down to about 140 to 160, which I just plan ahead, know that that's gonna be something I've got to do, is fill up a little bit more. And on that particular trip, I carried an extra fuel can because I just wasn't sure where fuel availability was going to be. One more thing about this engine, and I've seen some posts about it, I've had that experience myself, is that I got to a point where it would start stalling when I was rolling to a stop. And the only thing I can figure out, and from what I've read from the post, is the airbox gets dirty, which I'm kind of understanding that now. So I cleaned it out, wiped it down really, really well, and it seemed to cure the issue. But what I also discovered is KTM single cylinder engines, from what I can tell, the 690 does this, apparently the 390 Dukes, this is the same engine, is if you're running it really hard, or if you've overfilled the oil level, it may throw a little bit of oil from the crankcase ventilation tube. So I have seen a little bit of oil in there. So every time, you know, after I get done with the trip, I'll pop the airbox, the air filter off, look inside. If there's oil, clean that out and wipe it down, and that seems to take care of the problem. I don't know what to say about that. That's just been my experience. If you are watching this and you know anything more about that, leave that in the comments below, because I haven't quite figured that out. I need to go in and talk to the folks in the shop when I get the valve clearance, valve adjustment done, and see if that's just a normal thing with KTMs. All right, let's talk suspension. The front end is 6.7 inches of travel. It has separate circuits on each leg. One leg is for compression, the other leg is for rebound. The rear is 7 inches of travel, and it has a single adjustment that just says harder and softer. So I think it's a combo of compression dampening and rebound dampening from just basically controlling the oil movement in the shock. So not a lot to that shock. It does have preload adjustment in the rear, no preload in the front. Initially what I found is that, in my opinion, is that the static sag on this bike is, at least in the forks, is pretty high. So I'm looking to potentially replace the springs, but overall for road riding it would be just fine. I really like the adjustment that it has from the compression and rebound. I can dial in the front to behave the way I want it to. The one thing I will say is, from all of the different bikes that I've ridden over the last 5 or 6 years, this one has the most adjustability, and for a stock suspension, it's been the best that I have seen come out on a bike. I think KTM does a really good job with their suspensions on their bikes. Having the ability to adjust compression and rebound on a fork is fantastic. A lot of factory bikes don't have that, so you can get it tuned the way you want to. Now, a tip for you is if you are trying to figure out where you want your settings, behind the seat on the tank, it has some clicker settings depending on how you want it to be. If you want to adjust it any differently than that, only adjust one side at a time just to see how it feels when you take it out before adjusting the other side. Don't try to adjust all of them at once. Also, you may need to adjust it a long way to see how it feels, to see that difference, and then back it in to get it where you want it to be. I find the suspension overall, compared to other bikes, to be more than adequate for riding on the road because you have that adjustability. I run my suspension a bit stiffer than a lot of you may want on the road. Part of that is to be able to take bigger hits when I get it off-road, and I don't want to be changing my suspension settings from on-road to off-road. All right, this isn't quite about the suspension, but I just want to add, because this bike has a very short wheelbase, I really like that, because I can turn this thing around almost anywhere. It makes parking lot maneuvers really simple. I can back it in or turn it and put it in a spot just about anywhere. If I need to make a U-turn really quickly, it's easy. It is nice being on a smaller bike, something with a shorter wheelbase, because of the maneuverability. So don't discount what you can do on a bike like this, and just take some of the pressure and makes it more fun to ride. Ergonomics. When I first got the bike, the first thing I noticed is the handlebars felt a little bit low, but that was also because I was coming off of a bigger bike that had risers, so my arms were up a little bit higher. But I did put risers on this, more for the off-road riding, but when I did that, it put me in a little bit more comfortable position. That's just me, that's what I'm more used to the feel of my bike being. So I did that, and that was fine. Seated position, where my hands are, the reach to the handlebars, where my butt is on the seat, and where my feet are on the foot pegs, is a very comfortable position for me. That triangular position, I can ride like that for hours upon hours upon hours. And it's very natural. It's not uncomfortable. My knees don't get sore after lots of riding from being bent up. So I think the dynamics of that have been really good. The initial foot pegs, the original foot pegs that come on this, are canted forward. It's a road riding position. I think if all you're gonna do is road ride this bike, I think that's fine. You can just leave it that way. I think the first thing I did when I got home is I pulled the rubber pads out of the foot pegs, because I knew I was gonna be taking it off-road. If you're not gonna take it off-road, then it would be fine just to leave those in, just for a little bit more vibration dampening. The seat on this bike is described as firm, and I think that's a fair assessment. I'm fine with it. I may eventually replace it, but for now I've spent countless hours riding this seat the way it is. Now, after a number of hours, I might start shifting around the way I sit on the bike, but I just deal with it. I'm not going to complain too much about it. There are some options if you're not happy with this seat. KTM has a single piece, one-piece seat, but it raises the seat height a little bit. And then Seat Concepts also has a replacement seat. I think it's just the foam and the cover. I don't think it's the whole seat, but you can replace that on your bike as well. Seat Concept seats are really great. The foam is nice. It's very comfortable for long distance riding, and that might be something that I do with this. The windscreen, the original windscreen that came on this, was really quite short. And if you're going to be on the road, you're going to get a lot of wind pressure right on your chest. It's not going to lift it up off of there. And then also, I was getting a lot of wind in my shoulders. When I ride all day long, I don't like having that wind on my shoulders and my chest, because it fatigues me, and I'm much more tired at the end of the day. So I'm having to hold on, especially if you're running at highway speeds. So that was something I did pretty quickly, was I put a larger windscreen on. And I'll try to remember to leave a link up here to that video for the windscreen. The seat height on this bike is approximately 33.5 inches. I find it to be fine for me. I can get both of my feet down, not quite all the way down, more than balls of my feet. I like this height. My other bike is really tall, especially stopping when it's windy. Putting my feet down on this bike, having a little bit more control is nice to have at stoplights and stop and go traffic. Brakes on this bike. Front brake, 320mm rotor with Vibri caliper, twin piston caliper. It's just a single rotor. The Bybri calipers are a Brembo budget version of their brakes. ABS brakes on this bike, and then in the back, I don't remember what the rotor size is. If I remember, I'll put it on here. But yeah, same Bybri brakes in the rear. I will say that the braking on this bike really surprised me. I wasn't sure what to expect out of a single rotor, but because this bike is so light and the rotor is quite big, it is really, really good braking. When I want to stop, I can stop. I have no issues. The ABS works like it's supposed to, and I've had it engage a few times, not too many, but yeah, I think the brakes on this are fantastic. I actually prefer the braking on this bike over my big heavy touring bike. I think the brakes on this are better. The feel of the rear brakes, the one thing that I'll note is the feel of the rear brakes when I'm getting on the pedal. It feels a bit vague to me of when it is engaging and when I can feel it start slowing the bike down. I've played around just doing strictly rear braking and then combining rear and front braking, and I know my foot is on the pedal, I know it's pushing it down, but I don't necessarily feel that grab. So it's just a little bit different feel from what I'm used to. Once I've gotten used to it and I know when it's engaging and how much pressure I need to put on it, it was fine, but I wasn't feeling that bite out of the rear like I do out of the front when I start engaging it. All right, electronics package that comes on this bike, it includes a TFT screen, which it doesn't have a lot going on in the TFT screen. It gives you details. It has two different trips that you can use to track what you're doing. It gives you the RPM and speed right there up on the dash. I think it works perfectly. Getting through the menus, there's some buttons on the handlebar that you just scroll through. It wasn't that hard to figure out. It's pretty intuitive. So I think the TFT screen, the displays, and rolling through those are just fine. The bike has ABS, front and rear, and also lean angle ABS. The ABS can be turned off on the rear tire when you go off-road, and then the setting for the front is a little bit different. I don't think it engages quite as quickly off-road for the ABS. Traction control on this defaults to being on, and then if you want to turn it off going off-road, you can. But if the bike turns back on, it's going to go back to being traction control is going to go back to being engaged, and then if you stall it and don't restart the bike within a certain period of time, the traction control will default to going back on. It's just one of those little quirky things that you learn to live with and figure out. There is no heated grips, which I find fine. I wear heated glove liners, which I think do better than heated grips anyway, so I don't ever see myself putting heated grips on this bike. One other thing about electronics that I think KTM has done a really good job of understanding is that we as riders like to put accessories and do a bunch of different things. Is at the front back of the bike and underneath the headlamp, there are some accessory ports. There is 2 in the back, 2 in the front each. One of them in the back is switched off of the switch to the engine, and the other one is on all the time, same with the front. So if you're wanting to add accessories, it's pre-wired. You just have to get to that and then plug your stuff in, which I think is really fantastic, because a lot of other bikes with the CAN bus systems that they have, you have to have special controllers in order to add accessories. With this, it's very simple, very basic, and well thought out for us riders that like to add stuff to our bike. Tires, I'm gonna keep this brief. The bike comes with TKC 70 tires. I think they're a really great tire, especially on the road. They grip well, and I've ridden them quite a bit off-road. I thought they were just fine. I've seen a lot of complaints that this bike comes with the TKC 70s. Tires are the easiest modification you can make to your bike. Go get different tires if you don't like what comes on it. I know this is a little bit of a rant, but tires are such an easy thing to just replace and put on what you want. If you want more of a street-oriented tire, do that. If you want more of an off-road oriented tire, do that. Final thoughts on this bike. I enjoy riding this bike. Of course, I'm gonna say that it was a good decision to buy because I invested my own money into it, and I don't want to look like I've made a mistake. And I don't feel that way at all. I've had a blast riding this bike. I've took it all the way to La Paz, Baja, had a great week riding down there, did a little bit of off-road, most of it was highway, and it was a fantastic bike for that. I don't need a big bike to do that type of riding, and I think now that I've gone from having a big bike to having a small bike, I can do everything on this bike that I could do on the other, but with this bike I can do it with a lot less
stress in different situations, and I'm not as worried about if I break something, how many thousands of dollars is it going to cost. It's more like how many hundreds of dollars is it going to cost. So I like that part of it as well. And it's fun to ride. The big bikes, the Liter Plus bikes, those, I think it's mostly just throttle cruising when you're out riding. You can do about everything in a single gear because it just has that kind of range on the engine. Where this, I've enjoyed going back to riding a smaller capacity bike where I have to actually ride it. I've got to shift through the gears and make the engine and the bike work to do things where I didn't have to do that on a big touring bike. So that's made this bike fun to ride. And lastly, this bike is really fun if you're going to do any riding through the canyons. It's really flickable because of the lightweight. It leans in really easily. The handling is good. It's forgiving if you're making some mistakes while you're riding, and it's a treat. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this answers a lot of your questions about what this bike is like on the road. If I missed something or you have some additional questions, leave those in the comments below. If you have your own experience on this bike that you want to share with others, also leave those in the comments below. I'm just having a great time on this. I like having something smaller. I definitely like having something lighter. It makes a huge difference. And yeah, it's just been fun to ride. It's been an experience and a different way of approaching getting out and riding and camping and traveling. If you have this, I hope you're enjoying it as much as I am. And get out, do some riding, ride safe, and I will see you out there.